They say you never really know your parents. I never understood what that meant until I was 46 years old, sitting in a windowless room at the VA office in Richmond, Virginia, watching a federal officer lock the door behind him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, or at least what I thought was the beginning. My name is Daniel Reaves, and my father died when I was 19 years old. That was 2008, the year the economy collapsed. The year everyone seemed to be losing something. I lost everything. The obituary in the Richmond Times-Dispatch was small, tucked between a retired schoolteacher and a local businessman. Thomas Reaves, 62, Vietnam veteran and defense contractor, died suddenly of a heart attack on August 14, 2008. He is survived by his wife, Carla Reaves, and his son, Daniel. Services will be private. That was it. 30 words to summarize a man's entire life. It didn't mention the medals he'd earned. Didn't mention the scars on his back that he never explained. Didn't mention the way he'd wake up screaming some nights, or the locked safe in his study that no one was allowed to touch. The funeral was on a Thursday. It rained, one of those oppressive August rains that feels more like steam than water. There were maybe 20 people there, most of them from his construction crew. My father had worked as a project manager for a defense contractor after leaving the military, but he'd been tight-lipped about the details. "Just boring paperwork," he'd say when I asked. "Nothing you'd want to hear about." Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. My stepmother, Carla, stood beside me in an expensive black dress I'd never seen before, her face dry despite the rain. She'd married my father 5 years earlier, after my mother died from cancer. I'd never liked her. There was something calculating in her eyes, something that made me feel like an obstacle rather than family. At the graveside, she gripped my arm just a little too tight. "We'll get through this together, Daniel," she said, her voice pitched for the benefit of those around us. But her eyes told a different story. They were already tallying numbers, already planning. I didn't know it then, but my father had died with secrets. Big ones, the kind that don't stay buried forever. The unraveling started immediately. 3 days after the funeral, I came home from my shift at the hardware store. I dropped out of community college to help pay bills, to find Carla sitting at the kitchen table with a realtor and a lawyer. They were signing papers, talking about escrow and closing dates. "What's going on?" I asked, setting down my keys. Carla looked up, her expression one of practiced patience. "Daniel, honey, we need to talk. Your father left some debts, significant ones. The house needs to be sold to settle the estate." "Debts? What debts?" Dad was always careful with money. The lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "Credit cards, medical bills, outstanding loans. It adds up. The estate is essentially insolvent." "That doesn't make sense. Dad had life insurance. He had savings." "Had," Carla interrupted. "Past tense. Medical bills from the heart attack wiped out most of it. The rest barely covers the funeral costs." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "I'm sorry, Daniel, but that's reality. The house sells in 30 days. "But this is my home. I grew up here." "It's my house," she corrected, her voice hardening. "Legally. Your father put it in my name 2 years ago for estate planning purposes. I'm doing you a favor by letting you stay until closing." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "What am I supposed to do?" She shrugged. "You're 19. Figure it out. That's what adults do." Over the next 3 weeks, I watched her systematically dismantle my father's life. The furniture was sold, his tools, his books, his clothes, all auctioned off or donated, his military medals, a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, others I didn't even know the names of, disappeared into a lockbox that Carla took to a buyer downtown. "They're just metal," she said when I protested, "and I need the money." "They were Dad's. They meant something. They meant he risked his life for a government that didn't care about him. And look where that got him, dead at 62 with nothing to show for it." She looked at me with something close to pity. "You want to end up like that? Clinging to meaningless symbols while life passes you by?" I tried to find my father's safe, the one I'd seen in his study, a small fireproof box he kept in the closet. It was gone. When I asked Carla about it, she claimed she'd never seen such a thing. "Your father was paranoid toward the end," she said dismissively. "All those stories about classified work and secret missions. Daniel, your father was a project manager. He filed paperwork. He wasn't Jason Bourne." But I remembered the late-night phone calls, men with hard faces and serious eyes showing up at odd hours, speaking to my father in hushed tones, documents with black bars across entire paragraphs, my father's insistence that certain things stayed in the vault, whatever that meant. On my last day in the house, Carla found me in my father's study. I was sitting on the floor, going through the last box of his possessions that hadn't been sold, mostly old photographs and papers. "Time to go, Daniel," she said from the doorway. I looked up at her. "Why do you hate me so much?" She seemed surprised by the question. Then her face hardened. "I don't hate you. I just don't see the point of you. Your father was a loser who wasted his life on a country that didn't appreciate him, and you're exactly like him. No ambition, no drive, just mediocre." She crossed her arms. "So no, I don't hate you. I just don't see any reason to waste my time on you." "He loved you," I said quietly. "Dad really loved you." "Love doesn't pay bills," she replied. "Now get out. The new owners take possession tomorrow." I left with one suitcase, $300, and the bone-deep certainty that my stepmother was lying about something. But I was 19, broke, and had nowhere to go. What could I do? Her last words as I walked down the driveway. "You'll never be anything, Daniel, just like him." I spent the next 27 years trying to prove her wrong. The decades blurred together in a way that probably sounds familiar to a lot of people. I worked construction, saved money when I could, spent it when I had to. I rented a series of small apartments, each one slightly better than the last. I dated occasionally, never seriously. I made friends, lost touch with them, made new ones. I didn't become rich or famous or particularly successful by society's standards, but I also didn't become the failure Carla had predicted. I was just average. And after what she'd said, average felt like a victory. I thought about my father often, wondered about those late-night calls, those serious men, that locked safe. I tried a few times to get information, called the VA, requested his service records, searched online databases. Each time I hit a wall. Privacy restrictions, they said. Incomplete records. Limited information available for personnel from that era. Eventually, I stopped trying. My father took his secrets to the grave, and maybe that was how it was supposed to be. By 2025, at 46 years old, I'd saved enough for a down payment on a small house. Nothing fancy, a 2-bedroom ranch in a decent neighborhood outside Richmond. But it would be mine, the first thing I'd owned since leaving my childhood home. The real estate agent suggested I apply for a VA loan. "Your father was a veteran, right? You might qualify for better rates." I hadn't thought about VA benefits in years. "I'm not a veteran. My father was." "Some benefits transfer to dependents. Doesn't hurt to check." So, on a Tuesday morning in May, I walked into the Department of Veterans Affairs office on Broad Street. The building was one of those government structures that looked like it had been designed to intimidate, all concrete and security checkpoints and bureaucratic efficiency. I waited in a lobby that smelled like floor polish and old coffee, filling out forms on a clipboard. When my number was called, I followed a clerk to a small office where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes reviewed my application. "Daniel Reaves," she read from her screen. "Father was Thomas Reaves, served in Vietnam?" "Yes, ma'am. He died in 2008. "I'm sorry for your loss." She typed something. "Let me pull up his service record to verify eligibility for dependent benefits." She clicked her mouse a few times, squinting at her monitor. Her expression changed. Just slightly, but enough that I noticed. The kind eyes became uncertain eyes. "Something wrong?" I asked. "No, I just—" "One moment." She picked up her phone, pressed a few buttons. "Hey, Mike, can you come take a look at something? Room 3. She hung up, gave me an apologetic smile. "Just need a second opinion on the file structure. Old records sometimes have formatting issues." A man in his 50s appeared in the doorway, balding and wearing a short-sleeved dress shirt. "What's up, Karen?" She gestured to the screen. "Thomas Reaves, service record. Something's weird with the access permissions." Mike leaned over her shoulder, peered at the screen, and I watched his face go through the same transformation Karen's had. Interested to concerned to very carefully neutral. He said. "Yeah, that's... He straightened up. "Mr. Reaves, I'm going to need you to come with me for a moment. Just some additional verification." "Verification of what?" "Standard procedure for certain types of records. Won't take long." He led me down a corridor to a smaller office. More like a conference room, really. No windows, soundproof tiles on the ceiling, the kind of room where serious conversations happened. "Have a seat," Mike said, gesturing to a chair. "Can I get you water? Coffee?" "I'm fine. What's going on?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he went to the door, closed it, and I heard the distinct click of a lock engaging. When he turned back to me, his entire demeanor had changed. The bureaucratic helpfulness was gone, replaced by something more official, more careful. "Mr. Reaves," he said, sitting across from me, I need to ask you some questions before we proceed. How much do you know about your father's military service? He was in Vietnam. Infantry, I think. He didn't talk about it much. Did he ever mention any special assignments, classified work? I felt a chill run down my spine. No. Why? Mike studied me for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether I was lying. Then he sighed, unlocked a drawer in the desk, and pulled out a thin folder stamped with red letters. Classified. Sir, he said quietly, your father's service record is not like most records. The majority of it is sealed under black-level classification, which means even most VA personnel can't access it. The fact that you're his direct descendant is the only reason we can discuss it at all, and even then, there are limitations. My mouth had gone dry. Black-level classification. The highest level, reserved for operations that are officially denied by the government. He opened the folder carefully, as if the papers inside might catch fire. What I'm about to tell you is technically declassified as of 2020, but it's not common knowledge. Your father, Sergeant Thomas Reaves, was part of a special operations unit that conducted cross-border missions during the Vietnam War. Cross-border? Into Cambodia. Officially, we weren't in Cambodia. Unofficially, he showed me a page with more black bars than visible text. Your father was assigned to a unit with the codename Echo Viper. They conducted reconnaissance, sabotage, and target elimination in areas where American forces officially didn't exist. I stared at the page, at my father's name visible between redactions. Thomas Reaves, rank sergeant, assignment redacted, duration redacted, status redacted. I don't understand, I said. Why are you telling me this? Mike flipped to another page. This one had less redaction. At the top it read, Compensation Protocol, Echo Viper Personnel. In 1979, the Department of Defense set aside funds for Echo Viper personnel and their families. It was part of a classified settlement regarding, let's call them operational hazards. The personnel were exposed to certain chemicals and situations that qualified them for compensation. However, due to the classified nature of the unit, the compensation was never publicly distributed. It was held in trust, indexed for inflation, waiting for eligible recipients to come forward. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Are you saying my father was owed money? Your father died in 2008. According to our records, he never filed a claim, which means the compensation transferred to his next of kin. Mike looked at me directly, his expression carefully neutral. That would be you, Mr. Reaves. You're the sole surviving beneficiary. The room seemed to spin. The walls felt like they were closing in. How much are we talking about? A few thousand? 10,000? Mike shook his head slowly. The federal government established these compensation funds with built-in growth mechanisms. They knew that many recipients wouldn't or couldn't come forward immediately due to classification restrictions, so they structured the funds to grow substantially over time. He pulled out a calculator from his desk drawer, the old kind with the printing tape. The original amount set aside in 1979 was approximately $115,000. That was significant money back then, especially for a sergeant's family. Okay, so with inflation, maybe $200,000 now? Not quite. He began typing numbers, explaining as he went. The fund wasn't just indexed for basic inflation. It was tied to federal treasury bond rates with compound interest, recalculated annually. Over 46 years, that creates exponential growth. The calculator printed its ribbon of numbers. Let me show you the breakdown. He turned the calculator toward me, and I saw the printout. Principal, 1979. $115,000, dwarfs annual growth rate, AVG, 4.3%. Duration, a 46 years compound interest multiplier, 63.89x. Total value, 2025, $7,347,922.18. I stared at the numbers. They didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. 7. I couldn't finish the sentence. My throat had closed up. $7,347,922, Mike said quietly. And 18 cents, if we're being precise. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The number was so large it didn't feel real. It felt like something from a movie, a fantasy. $7 million. $7 million. That can't be right, I whispered, my voice barely audible. That's more than most people make in their entire lives. It is, Mike agreed. It's an extraordinary amount. But the fund was designed that way deliberately. The government knew that Echo Viper personnel and their families were being asked to maintain silence about highly sensitive operations. The compensation was meant to reflect not just the hazards they faced, but the lifelong burden of secrecy they carried. My hands were shaking. I clasped them together to make them stop. My stepmother told me Dad died broke. She said there was nothing. That's why she sold everything, kicked me out. Mike's expression hardened slightly. Your father's financial situation at death was complicated, but this fund existed separately from his personal finances. It was held in a federal trust completely independent of his estate. Your stepmother wouldn't have had any visibility into it unless your father specifically told her. Did he tell her? I can't answer that, but I can tell you that the claim required specific documentation that only your father would have had access to. If he didn't tell anyone about it, no one would have known to look. Mike paused. Given your description of your stepmother's actions, I'd say it's unlikely he shared this information with her. I thought about Carla, about the way she'd systematically stripped my father's life down to nothing, about the metals sold for scrap, the house sold for profit, the locked safe that had disappeared. Had she known? Had she searched for evidence of this money and simply failed to find it? Or had my father kept it hidden so well that not even someone looking would discover it? Why didn't he claim it? I asked. Why leave it sitting there for 29 years? That can't be right, I whispered. I've triple-checked it, Mike said. The fund was specifically structured to grow over time, with the assumption that many recipients wouldn't come forward for decades due to the classified nature of the operations. The government essentially invested your father's compensation and let it grow. Why didn't anyone tell us? Why didn't my father know? He did know, or at least he should have. Mike pulled out another document. He was briefed in 1979, and again in 1982. He signed acknowledgement forms both times. He chose not to file the claim. Why would he do that? I can't answer that, but I can tell you that several Echo Viper personnel made the same choice. Some felt it was blood money. Others were afraid that claiming it would bring unwanted attention to their families. Your father might have had his reasons. I sat there stunned, trying to process it. My father had known about this money, had chosen not to claim it, had died without telling me it existed. There's something else, Mike said quietly. He reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. It was yellowed with age, the seal unbroken. Written across the front in handwriting I recognized instantly. To my son, Daniel. My hand shook as I took it. How long has this been here? It was filed with his original claim documents in 1979. You were 5 years old. Mike stood. I'll give you some privacy. Take your time. He left the room, the lock clicking shut behind him. I sat alone in that windowless space, holding an envelope my father had written 46 years ago, before I could even read. I broke the seal carefully, as if the paper might disintegrate. Inside were two things, a photograph and a letter. The photograph showed my father in military fatigues, younger than I'd ever seen him, standing with 4 other men in what looked like a jungle clearing. They all had hard eyes and harder smiles, the kind of smiles that said they'd seen things civilians couldn't imagine. On the back, someone had written, Echo Viper, 1971, Cambodia. The ones who came back. The letter was written on yellowed paper, the ink slightly faded, but still legible. My father's handwriting, neat, precise, the handwriting of someone who'd filled out countless military forms. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means they finally told you. It means I'm gone, and you've stumbled onto the ghost file, the record of things that weren't supposed to exist but did anyway. I need you to understand something. The money isn't about the missions or what we did. It's about what came after, the things we carried back with us, the things we breathed, the things we saw, the pieces of ourselves we left in places that officially never happened. I chose not to claim it because I was afraid that accepting blood money would define me, afraid that it would taint you, afraid that the past would swallow the future. But I also knew there might come a day when you needed it, when life knocked you down and you needed a hand back up, so I made sure it would be there, waiting, growing. Insurance against a future I couldn't predict. By now, you're probably grown. Maybe you have kids of your own. Maybe you think I was a fool for not using this money to give you a better life. You might be right. But I wanted you to earn your own way first, to know what it means to build something from nothing, to understand that money without character is just paper. If you ever find this, it means they finally told you what Echo Viper was, what I was. Some people will say we were heroes. Others will say we were war criminals. The truth, like most truths, is more complicated than either label. We were young men doing impossible things in impossible situations. We made choices we'll never stop paying for. But we also saved lives. more than most people will ever know. That's the part that helps me sleep at night. Most nights, anyway. Don't let anger take what love built, Daniel. Don't let the bitterness of the past poison the possibilities of your future. I couldn't protect you from everything when I was alive, but I made sure you'd be okay one day. Use this wisely. Build something good. Be better than I was. I love you, son. I always did, even when I couldn't find the words to say it. Dad. I read it 3 times, tears blurring the words. My father had known. He'd known about the money, known it was growing, known I'd find it someday. He'd planned this, all of it, and Carla had sold his medals for scrap. When Mike returned 20 minutes later, he found me staring at the letter, my face wet with tears. You okay, Mr. Reaves? He knew, I said. All along he knew. Most of them did. The Echo Viper personnel were offered the compensation as a condition of their silence. Many refused it on principle. Your father, he took a middle path. He secured it for you but didn't touch it himself. What do I need to do to claim it? Mike sat down, pulled out a stack of forms. It's a process. Background check, identity verification, tax documentation. The fund is held by the Treasury Department, so there's federal oversight. We're probably looking at 3 to 4 months before the first disbursement. Disbursement? The full amount will be paid out over time, monthly installments over 2 years, with the option to take a lump sum after the first year. It's structured that way to avoid complications. Suddenly having $7 million can be as dangerous as having nothing. I laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. Yeah, I can imagine. There's one more thing, Mike said carefully. The nature of your father's service, the classified operations. There will be people who ask questions when you suddenly have this money. You'll need a cover story. The official line is that it's a delayed settlement from a class action lawsuit regarding chemical exposure during the Vietnam War. That's technically true and publicly defensible. So I'm supposed to lie. You're supposed to protect yourself and your father's legacy. The full truth is still classified and will be for another 25 years. When people ask, and they will ask, you tell them about the lawsuit. You don't mention Echo Viper, Cambodia, or any specifics. Understood? I nodded slowly, still processing everything. $7 million. A father I'd never really known. A past that officially never happened. One last question, I said. My stepmother, Carla, when she sold the house and his belongings, could she have known about this? Mike's expression darkened. That's outside my area of expertise. But I will say this. If your father kept documentation, if there was a safe or records that disappeared after his death, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I left the VA office 3 hours later with a folder full of forms, a photocopy of my father's letter, and a growing certainty that Carla had known, had lied, had stolen not just my inheritance, but the truth about my father. The next few months were surreal. Background checks, interviews, document signing. I had to hire a lawyer, a good one specializing in federal claims, and an accountant. The first installment hit my bank account in August, $306,163.42. I stared at my phone, at the balance that had gone from $3,247 to over $300,000 overnight. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked up Carla Reaves. It took less than an hour to find her. She was still in Richmond, living in a large house in Windsor Farms, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. According to property records, she'd bought it in 2012 with cash. 3,000 square feet, swimming pool, 3-car garage. I sat in my rented apartment, looking at the Zillow photos of her mansion, and felt rage build in my chest like a living thing. She'd called my father a loser, called me worthless, and then she'd built her comfortable life on... What? Where had the money come from? I called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who'd handled the VA claim with impressive efficiency. Patricia, I need you to look into something. My stepmother, Carla Reaves. I want to know where her money came from. Daniel, that's not really my area. Please, I'll pay whatever it takes. Something's wrong. I need to know. She sighed. I'll make some calls. No promises. 2 weeks later, she called me back. Daniel, you were right to be suspicious. Your stepmother's finances are... interesting. After your father's death, she sold the house for $200,000. That tracks. But then there are several large deposits in 2009 and 2010 that don't have clear sources. She also sold a storage unit's worth of items to various military memorabilia dealers, including medals and documents. Documents? Unspecified. The sales were private, cash transactions. But one dealer I spoke with remembered the sale, said it included unusual military paperwork. that he eventually sold to a collector for a substantial amount. My father's files, the ones from the safe. There's more, Patricia continued. The house she's in now? It's technically owned by a trust, the Reaves family trust. Your father established it in 2006 before he died. What does that mean? It means the house isn't solely your stepmother's property. You're listed as a beneficiary of the trust. She's been living in it as a trustee, but she doesn't own it outright. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Can she be removed as trustee? That depends on the trust documents and whether she's violated her fiduciary duties. Selling trust assets without beneficiary knowledge could qualify. Daniel, if your father's safe contained trust documents and she sold them or hid them, that's a serious legal problem for her. What do? We start by requesting a full accounting of the trust. She's legally required to provide it. If she can't or won't, well, then we have options. The letter arrived at Carla's house 3 days later, sent via certified mail. Request for trust accounting and beneficiary status review. I imagined her opening it, her face going pale, and smiled. I waited a month. No response. Patricia filed a motion with the court. Finally, I decided it was time for a personal visit. I'd like to say I felt conflicted about what I was about to do, but I didn't. Carla had kicked me out with nothing, sold my father's legacy for profit, and lied about all of it. Whatever mercy I might have felt had died somewhere in the 27 years since she'd called me worthless. I drove to Windsor Farms on a Saturday morning in October. The neighborhood was ridiculous. Every house a mansion, every lawn perfect, every car expensive. Carla's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a colonial revival with white columns and black shutters. There was a for sale sign in the yard, but not a normal one, a foreclosure notice. I parked on the street and walked up the driveway. The house looked less perfect up close. The paint was fading, the lawn needed work, and several windows were dark. I rang the doorbell and waited. Carla answered. She'd aged, of course. She was in her 60s now, her hair gray where it used to be blonde, her face lined, but her eyes were the same, calculating, cold. She stared at me for a long moment, not recognizing me. Then I saw the moment it clicked. Daniel? Her voice was uncertain. Why are you here? Hello, Carla. Long time. I don't understand. How did you find me? Public records. It's amazing what you can find online these days. I gestured to the foreclosure sign. Having some financial troubles? Her face hardened. That's none of your business. You need to leave. Actually, I think it is my business. See, I did some digging. Found out about the Reaves family trust. I found out that this house, I gestured to the mansion behind her, technically belongs to the trust, which means it partially belongs to me. She went pale. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that you were supposed to be the trustee, that you were supposed to manage the assets for the beneficiaries, including me. I know that you sold my father's metals and files without telling me. I know that you kicked me out with nothing while sitting on assets that weren't solely yours to control. I smiled. How am I doing so far? Get off my property, she hissed. It's not your property. That's the point. I pulled an envelope from my pocket, not unlike the one my father had left for me, but this one contained legal documents. This is a court order requiring you to appear for a hearing regarding your management of the trust. My lawyer will be in touch with the details. You can't afford a lawyer. Actually, I can. Turns out Dad left me something you didn't know about. I paused. Something you couldn't steal. Her eyes widened slightly. What are you talking about? Ask me how much, Carla. How much what? How much my father left me. The inheritance you said didn't exist. She didn't respond, but I could see the fear in her eyes. $7 million, I said quietly. Give or take. Held in a federal trust, indexed for inflation since 1979. All those late-night visitors, those classified files you sold. Dad was part of a black ops unit in Vietnam, and he made sure I'd be taken care of, even if he couldn't tell me about it while he was alive. Carla's face went from pale to ashen. $7 million? Meanwhile, you sold his metals for what? A few thousand? Kicked me out so you could live in a house that was never completely yours? Called us both losers? I shook my head. He was right about you. He knew what you'd do. That's why he protected me. Daniel, I didn't come here for an apology. I came to tell you that I'm taking what's mine. The house belongs to the trust, which means I have a claim to it. You're being foreclosed on because you can't make the payments. I'm going to buy it out of foreclosure, and then I'm going to sell it, and you'll be evicted. You can't do that. Actually, I can. My lawyer assures me I can. I held up the envelope. This is your official notice. You have 30 days to vacate. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know, Carla. Figure it out. That's what adults do. Isn't that what you told me? Her face crumpled, tears starting to flow. Daniel, please. I was scared back then. Your father's death. The debts you made up. The financial crisis you manufactured to justify stealing from a 19-year-old. I stepped back. I spent 27 years thinking I was worthless, that my father was a failure. You took that from me. You took the truth about who he was, what he'd done, what he'd provided for me. You sold his legacy for cash and told me I'd never be anything. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I don't care. And the terrible thing was, I meant it. I felt no satisfaction in her tears, no joy in her fear. Just a cold certainty that this needed to happen. 30 days, Carla. After that, the sheriff will remove you. I turned and walked back to my car. Behind me, I heard her calling my name, but I didn't stop. I'd said what I came to say. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her standing in the driveway of the house she was about to lose. And I thought about my father's letter. Don't let anger take what love built. But this wasn't anger. This was justice. Cold, mathematical, inevitable justice. The foreclosure went through 6 weeks later. I bought the house at auction for less than market value. The trust's claim gave me first right of refusal. Carla was evicted on a Tuesday morning in November. I wasn't there to see it, but my lawyer was. She reported that Carla left with 3 suitcases and tears. I sold the house a month later, making a profit of $73,000 on top of the purchase price. I donated the profit to a veterans charity that specialized in helping families of soldiers with PTSD. It seemed like what my father would have wanted. With the full compensation finally dispersed, $7,300,000 after taxes and legal fees, I did something I'd been thinking about for months. I drove to Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia, where my father was buried. His headstone was simple. Thomas Reaves, Sergeant U.S. Army, Vietnam, 1946-2008. No mention of Echo Viper, no mention of Cambodia. Just the official story. I sat on the grass beside his grave and told him everything. About finding the file, the money, the letter, about Carla and the house and the justice I'd pursued. I don't know if I did the right thing, I said to the stone. You said not to let anger take what love built. But was that anger or justice? I honestly don't know anymore. The stone, predictably, didn't answer. I'd started a foundation with some of the money, the Thomas Reaves Memorial Fund, supporting families of veterans with classified service records who'd fallen through bureaucratic cracks. It felt right. Felt like honoring not just my father, but all the ghost soldiers who'd done impossible things in impossible places. I'd bought a house too. Nothing fancy, just a nice 3-bedroom in a good neighborhood. I'd quit construction and went back to school, finally finishing that degree I'd started decades ago. I'd even started dating someone, a kind woman named Sarah who worked at the VA office and had helped me navigate the initial claim. Life, improbably, was good, better than I'd ever imagined it could be. But some nights I'd wake up thinking about my father, about the choices he'd made, the secrets he'd kept, about the men in that photograph, the ones who came back, and the ones who didn't, about what it must have been like to do things that couldn't be acknowledged, to carry scars that couldn't be explained, about what it took to be the kind of man who'd secure $7 million for his son but never touch it himself, who'd die with nothing, appear to die with nothing, so that someday his son might have everything. You weren't a loser, Dad, I said to the empty bedroom. Carla was wrong. She was wrong about everything. A year after finding the ghost file, I received one more envelope. This one wasn't from my father. It was from the Department of Defense Office of Declassified Records. Inside was a single page stamped declassified as of 2025. It was a mission report from 1971, signed by Sergeant Thomas Reaves. Operation Sanctuary, Cambodia. Mission objective, rescue of downed aircrew behind enemy lines. 4 pilots retrieved, hostile contact sustained, all personnel returned safely. 0 friendly casualties. Recommend commendation for CPL James Chen, SPC David Martinez, and Sergeant Thomas Reaves for extraordinary valor under fire. Below the report was a handwritten note, dated 1979. Compensation offered and declined. These men did their duty. They don't need money to make it right. They need recognition. When this is declassified, make sure people know they were heroes. Richard Price, Echo Viper Command. I framed that page and hung it in my study, right next to my father's letter and the photograph of Echo Viper, the ones who came back. Not all of them came back whole. Not all of them came back with their stories intact. But they came back, and they'd saved lives, and they'd kept secrets for decades because someone told them it was necessary. My father wasn't a loser. He was a hero who'd been buried in paperwork and black ink and official denials. And now, finally, people would know. 2 years after finding the ghost file, I hosted a small ceremony at the house. Sarah was there, along with my lawyer Patricia, Mike from the VA office, and 3 elderly men I'd tracked down through military records, the surviving members of Echo Viper. James Chen was 74, a retired engineer from California. David Martinez was 73, a former teacher from Texas. Robert Coleman was 75, a mechanic from North Carolina. They were the ones who'd stood beside my father in that photograph 54 years ago. We raised glasses of bourbon, my father's favorite, and I read his letter aloud. When I finished, James Chen, the youngest of the survivors, spoke. "Your father saved my life twice," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Once in Cambodia, when he pulled me out of a firefight, and once in 1979, when he convinced me not to eat my pistol." He looked at the other survivors, who nodded. "We all went through hell after we got back. The nightmares, the guilt, the way nobody could know what we'd done or where we'd been. Tom held us together. He was the strongest of us, even when he was breaking." "He never told me," I said quietly. "He wouldn't have. That was the deal. The price of Echo Viper." David Martinez raised his glass. "To Thomas Reaves. To the ghosts who came back." "To the ghosts who came back," we all echoed. After they left, Sarah found me standing in front of my father's photograph, the one from Cambodia. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, I think so." I turned to her. I spent so many years thinking he was a failure, that I came from nothing, and all along, you came from someone extraordinary, someone who made impossible choices in impossible situations and still managed to protect you. I wish I'd known him better, known the truth. "Maybe that's what the money is for," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Not just financial security, but the freedom to discover who he really was, to honor his legacy properly." She was right, of course. The money wasn't just money. It was time, freedom, opportunity. It was my father's final gift, purchased at the cost of his own comfort, and secured through decades of silence. I used it to build something good. The foundation helped dozens of families navigate the VA bureaucracy, helped ghost soldiers and their children access benefits they'd earned but never knew existed. I published a book about Echo Viper, carefully, with DoD approval, sharing what could be shared while protecting what still needed protection. And I made sure my father's name appeared in that book not as a footnote or a casualty, but as a hero who'd done extraordinary things in service of others. Carla, I heard through the grapevine, moved to Florida, took a job as a receptionist at a dental office, lived in a small apartment paid for by Social Security and the charity of a distant cousin. I didn't seek her out, didn't gloat or follow up. She'd faded from my life as she deserved to, not with dramatic confrontation, but with simple, permanent irrelevance. Some people asked if I felt bad about what happened to her. I didn't. Should I? She'd made her choices, built her life on lies, and stolen inheritance. The consequences were hers to bear, just as the blessings I'd received were mine to steward. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's just about the scales finally balancing. On the 5th anniversary of finding the ghost file, I stood at my father's grave again. The foundation was thriving. The book had been well received. I'd married Sarah the year before, and she was 3 months pregnant with our first child. "If it's a boy," I told the headstone, "we're naming him Thomas. If it's a girl, maybe Thomas anyway." Sarah seems to think that's weird, but I'm working on her. The wind rustled through the trees of Arlington, carrying the whisper of thousands of stories buried in that sacred ground. Heroes and ghost soldiers, the recognized and the forgotten, all resting together in measured rows. "You were right, Dad," I said. "Money without character is just paper. But character with money? That's how you change the world. That's how you honor the past while building the future." I placed a new flag at his grave, this time one with a small brass plaque I'd commissioned. Sergeant Thomas Reaves, Echo Viper, 1971, the ones who came back. It wasn't official, wasn't authorized by the Army, but it was true, and truth matters more than authorization. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with an email from Mike at the VA office. Subject line, "Another ghost file." The email was brief. "Daniel, we've found another sealed compensation case. Widow doesn't know about it, needs someone who understands the system to help navigate the claim. Interested?" I smiled and typed back, "Send me the details." Because that's what heroes do. Not just the ones who served, but the ones who carry their legacy forward. We honor the ghosts by helping others find their way out of the dark. My father gave me more than money. He gave me purpose, truth, and the understanding that some battles don't end when the shooting stops. They continue through generations, through classified files and sealed envelopes, through children who grow up not knowing what their parents sacrificed. And sometimes, if we're lucky, those children get a chance to finally understand, to finally say thank you, to finally make it right. I'd been called a genetic dead end by someone who couldn't see that my father's real legacy wasn't genetic at all. It was moral, ethical, spiritual, the kind of inheritance that multiplies rather than divides, that grows stronger as it's shared. Carla had sold my father's medals for scrap metal, but she'd never had what really mattered, the knowledge of who he was, what he'd done, what he'd protected. She'd died poor in all the ways that count. I'd become rich in all the ways that matter. And somewhere, I like to think, my father was smiling. Not because I'd gotten revenge on Carla, though he probably wouldn't have minded that, but because I'd found the ghost file, read the letter, understood the sacrifice, because I'd become the man he hoped I'd be, because I'd proven that love, built properly and protected carefully, can survive anything, even decades of silence, even death, even black-level classification. I'd proven that some legacies are too important to die, and that sometimes the dead can still speak. You just have to know how to listen. The phone rang as I pulled out of Arlington's parking lot. It was James Chen. "Daniel, I've been thinking about the foundation, about what your father would want." "What's that?" "There are more of us, more Echo Viper families who never knew, never claimed their compensation. The government isn't exactly advertising its existence." "I know. That's why I asked Mike to send me cases." "Good. But I think we need to be more proactive. I have names, addresses, guys I served with who died without their families knowing what they'd done. Their kids deserve to know, deserve what your father secured for you." I thought about it as I merged onto the highway. About all those ghost files, gathering dust in secure facilities. About all those sealed envelopes with letters that would never be read. About all those children who'd grown up thinking their fathers were failures when they were actually heroes. "You're right," I said. "Let's find them, every single one." "It could take years." "Then it takes years. Dad waited 46 years for me to find his file. I think we can afford to put in the work." James laughed. A sound I was learning meant approval from the old soldier. "Your father would be proud of you, Daniel." "I hope so. I'm trying to be." "You're doing more than trying. You're succeeding." We talked for another 20 minutes, making plans, discussing logistics. By the time I hung up, I had a mission, maybe not as dramatic as rescuing downed pilots in Cambodia, but important nonetheless. We would find the ghost files, all of them. We would tell the truth, as much as classification allowed. We would make sure the families knew their loved ones had been heroes. And we would make sure that no child had to wait 46 years to discover their father's legacy. That night, I sat in my study and composed an email to the DoD's Office of Declassified Records. Professional, formal, but with an underlying intensity they'd recognize. Subject: Freedom of Information Request. Echo Viper Personnel Roster. To whom it may concern, I am writing to request all available declassified information regarding personnel assigned to Operational Unit Echo Viper during the Vietnam War era. As the son of a confirmed Echo Viper member and founder of the Thomas Reaves Memorial Fund, I am working to identify and assist families of classified service members who may be entitled to compensation under existing federal programs. I understand that much of this information remains classified. However, I am requesting access to all materials currently available for public release, including but not limited to personnel rosters, casualty reports, compensation records, and any posthumous commendations that have been declassified since 2020. This request is made in the public interest and in service of veterans' families who have yet to receive the recognition and compensation they deserve. Respectfully, Daniel Reaves founder, Thomas Reaves Memorial Fund. I hit send and sat back, looking at my father's photograph on the wall. "Starting to understand what you went through, Dad," I said to the image. "The paperwork, the bureaucracy, the fight to do the right thing when the system makes it so damn hard." But understanding something and living it are different things. My father had lived it, carried those secrets for decades, protected me from knowledge that could have destroyed our family, set up a future I couldn't even imagine. All I had to do was honor it, follow through, make it mean something. 6 months later, we'd identified 43 Echo Viper families who'd never claimed their compensation. Most of the original members were dead, cancer, PTSD-related suicides, simple old age, but their children were still alive, still waiting for truth they didn't even know existed. We contacted them one by one. Some were receptive, eager to learn about fathers they'd never understood. Others were suspicious, thought we were scammers, A few were angry at the government, angry at their fathers for keeping secrets, angry at us for disturbing graves they'd thought were settled. But we kept going. By the 2-year mark, we'd helped 21 families successfully claim their compensation. Millions of dollars returned to people who needed it, deserved it, had been denied it through nothing more than bureaucratic opacity and classified secrecy. The DoD wasn't happy about it. Each claim they processed was an admission of something they'd prefer stayed buried, but they couldn't refuse legitimate claims, couldn't hide behind classification when the families had proof. We became very good at finding proof. And with each family we helped, I felt a little more like I was fulfilling my father's actual wish. Not just receiving his gift, but multiplying it, spreading it, making sure his sacrifice rippled outward instead of ending with me. Sarah gave birth to our son on a cold February morning. We named him Thomas Daniel Reaves, and when I held him for the first time, I cried like I'd never cried before. "Your grandfather was a hero," I whispered to the tiny red-faced infant. "And you're going to know everything about him. No secrets, no ghost files, just truth." Sarah smiled from the hospital bed. "You're going to tell a baby about classified military operations?" "Eventually, when he's old enough to understand." I looked at our son, at this new life that wouldn't have existed without my father's sacrifice. He deserves to know where he comes from, who made him possible. "Then you'll tell him?" Sarah agreed. "But maybe wait until he's out of diapers first?" "Deal." That night, with Sarah and Thomas asleep, I stepped out into the hospital corridor and called James Chen. "It's a boy," I said when he answered. "Congratulations. Named him Thomas?" "Thomas Daniel. Figured I'd get my own name in there too, for my mother." "Your father would love that. Would have loved that. Damn, I wish he could meet his grandson." "Maybe he can," I said, looking through the nursery window at the rows of sleeping infants. "Maybe he's watching somehow. If anyone earned the right to stick around as a ghost, it's an echo viper." James laughed. "Truth. Speaking of which, I got a lead on another family. Corporal Stevens' daughter, lives in Oregon, doesn't know her father was anything more than regular infantry. Send me the details. I'll reach out next week." "You sure? You just became a father. Take some time." "This is the best time. I finally understand what Dad felt when I was born, the weight of it, the responsibility of protecting someone who can't protect themselves." I paused. "Every kid we help, every family we reach. That's me protecting Thomas, building a world where service means something, where sacrifice isn't forgotten." "You're going to be a good father, Daniel." "I'm going to try to be as good as mine was. That's all any of us can do." 5 years after finding the ghost file, the Thomas Reaves Memorial Fund had helped 67 families. We'd recovered over $80 million in compensation, published a book documenting the Echo Viper unit's history, and successfully lobbied for a small memorial at Arlington recognizing classified service members. The memorial was unveiled on a sunny May morning. It was small, just a black granite marker with the inscription, "In honor of those who served in silence, the ghosts who came back and those who didn't." No names, no unit designations. Just acknowledgement that they existed, that they mattered. All 3 surviving Echo Viper members attended: James Chen, David Martinez, and Robert Coleman. They stood in their old uniforms, still fit them, remarkably, and saluted as the memorial was unveiled. Thomas, now 4 years old, stood beside me in tiny dress clothes. "Daddy, why is everyone crying?" "Because sometimes happy tears and sad tears look the same," I explained. "They're happy that someone finally remembered, sad that it took so long." "Did Grandpa Thomas serve in silence?" "He did." "But we remember him now?" "We do. Always will." Thomas thought about this, then said, "Good. Grandpas should be remembered." Out of the mouths of babes. After the ceremony, James Chen approached me, moving slower than he used to, but still sharp-eyed and alert. "Your father would be proud, Daniel. This memorial, the fund, everything you've built." I had good material to work with. He left me the blueprint. "He left you money. You built the legacy." James clapped me on the shoulder. "That's the difference. Money's just money. Legacy is what we make of it." "Speaking of which," I said, "I've been thinking about the next phase. We've done good work with Echo Viper families, but there are other classified units, other ghost soldiers. What if we expanded?" James's eyes lit up. "You want to take on the whole Black Ops community? Why not? We've got the resources, the expertise, the credibility, and there are probably hundreds of families out there who don't know what they're entitled to. The government will fight you harder. Echo Viper's been declassified for 5 years now, but other programs are still active, still sensitive. Then we'll be careful, Stay within the law, respect what needs to stay secret, but where there are families in need and compensation available, we help. That's the mission. David Martinez joined us, having overheard the conversation. Count me in. I'm retired, got nothing but time and a desire to make things right. Robert Coleman nodded. Same. Let's find them all. And so we did. Over the next decade, the Thomas Reaves Memorial Fund became the leading advocacy organization for families of classified military personnel. We worked with the DoD, the CIA, even the NSA in limited capacities. We helped families navigate security clearances, access benefits, understand the sacrifices their loved ones had made. We never compromised operational security, never revealed active programs or endangered current personnel, but within those boundaries, we fought like hell for the families. By the time Thomas turned 14, the same age I'd been when I started to notice my father's secrets, we'd helped over 300 families recover nearly $500 million in compensation. But more importantly, we'd given them truth, closure, pride. I taught Thomas to shoot at a range, just like my father had taught me. One afternoon, as we packed up our gear, he asked the question I'd been waiting for. Dad, will I have to keep secrets someday, like Grandpa did? I thought carefully before answering. I hope not. I hope your generation lives in a world with fewer secrets, more honesty. But if you do have to keep secrets, if you serve your country or protect people you love, make sure you leave a map. Make sure someone can find the truth eventually. Like Grandpa's letter? Exactly like that? Can I read it? I'd been saving the original for him, keeping it in a safety deposit box. When you turn 18, I'll give it to you. Until then, I can tell you what it said. Okay. We sat in the car outside the range, and I recited my father's letter from memory. I'd read it so many times I could probably recite it in my sleep. When I finished, Thomas was quiet for a long time. He sounds cool, he finally said. Grandpa Thomas. He was. Best man I never really got to know. But you know him now, right? Through the foundation and the stories and everything? Yeah, buddy, I know him now. Good, because I want to know him too. Through you. And that, right there, was the whole point. The legacy wasn't the money or the medals or even the heroic missions. It was the chain of knowledge and love passing from father to son, generation to generation. My father had protected me by keeping secrets. I honored him by revealing them. Thomas would carry us both forward into whatever future awaited. On what would have been my father's 80th birthday, I stood at his grave with Sarah, Thomas, and our daughter Emma, who'd been born 3 years earlier. We'd brought a birthday cake, chocolate, his favorite. Probably violated some cemetery regulation, but the groundskeeper who saw us just smiled and looked the other way. Make a wish, Grandpa, Emma said seriously, her small face scrunched in concentration. Grandpa's not here, sweetie, Sarah said gently. Yes, he is, Emma insisted. He's everywhere. Out of the mouths of babes, again. We sang Happy Birthday, ate cake sitting on the grass, and told stories. I shared the ones I remembered from childhood, and James Chen, who'd driven from California for the occasion, shared ones from Cambodia I'd never heard. Your grandfather saved my life, James told Thomas and Emma. But more than that, he taught me how to live when we got home, how to carry the weight without letting it crush you. Did he carry a lot of weight? Thomas asked. More than you can imagine, but he did it so you wouldn't have to. As the sun set over Arlington, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I thought about the journey from that VA office to this moment, from the ghost file to the memorial fund, from loss to purpose. My father had died thinking I'd never know, never understand, never see the full picture of who he was and what he'd done. But he'd been wrong. I knew, I understood, and I'd made damn sure the world understood too. That's what sons do. We honor our fathers by becoming better men, by taking their sacrifices and multiplying them, by ensuring that their silence becomes our voice. As we packed up to leave, Emma tugged on my sleeve. Daddy, does Grandpa know we came? I knelt down to her level. Yeah, sweetheart, I think he does. Good. We should come back next year. We will. Every year. Promise? Promise. And that was the real legacy. Not the money, not the medals, not the missions. Just love, carried forward through time, refusing to die. Some ghosts never rest. They walk beside us, invisible but felt, pushing us toward justice, toward truth, toward becoming the people they believed we could be. My father was that kind of ghost, and I was proud to be haunted. We drove home as night fell over Washington, D.C. Sarah dozed in the passenger seat. The kids talked quietly in the back, and I thought about the letter I was writing for Thomas and Emma, my own version of my father's ghost file. If you're reading this, it began, it means I'm gone and you're looking for answers. Here's what matters. Your grandfather was a hero. Your father tried to honor that. And you, whatever you become, whoever you are, carry that forward. Build on it. Make it mean something. I hadn't finished it yet. Didn't need to for years, probably. But I was writing it, adding to it, making sure that if something happened, they'd have what I'd had. A map back to truth, a connection to the past, a foundation for the future. Because that's what we owe the ghosts. Not just remembrance, but continuation. Not just honor, but action. Not just knowledge of the past, but commitment to the future. My father had bet on me before I was old enough to understand what I was betting on, had secured my future at the cost of his own comfort, had died thinking I might never know what he'd done. I'd proven him both right and wrong. Wrong that I'd never know. Right that I'd use it well. And now I was making the same bet on my children with one crucial difference. They wouldn't have to wait 40 years to learn the truth. They'd grow up knowing where they came from, who made them possible, what sacrifices secured their future. No ghost files for them. Just truth from the beginning. That was my gift to them, purchased with my father's sacrifice and my own decades of work. And it was worth every penny of that $7 million. Worth every moment of doubt, every confrontation with Carla, every difficult conversation with bureaucrats and lawyers. Worth everything. Because in the end, we're not measured by what we inherit. We're measured by what we do with it. And I'd taken my father's ghost file and turned it into a living legacy. That's what sons do. That's what heroes deserve. And that's what love, properly protected and carefully tended, can accomplish across generations. The ghosts who came back never really leave. They just change form, from flesh to memory to action to legacy. My father wasn't in that grave at Arlington. He was in the foundation bearing his name, in the families we'd helped, in the memorial we'd built, in the truth we'd uncovered, in the children who'd never have to wonder if their fathers were heroes. He was everywhere. Emma had been right about that, and he always would be, because that's what it means to be truly immortal, not to never die, but to never stop mattering. And Thomas Reaves, Sergeant, Echo Viper, Classified Service, would matter forever. I'd made sure of that. His genetic dead end had become an eternal legacy. And somewhere, I like to think, he was proud.